Hi, everyone. Welcome to the fifth episode of the Insider Threat Podcasts by StealthBits Technologies. I'm your host, Jonathan Sander, the CTO here at StealthBits. And with me today is Gabriel Gumbs, our VP of Product Strategy here at StealthBits, a thought leader in security, I think that's fair to say, and a guy with really epic stories that we're not going to tell right now. We're going to focus on something else than his epic stories. We're going to focus on his epic week last week. Gabe went and represented StealthBits at Black Hat, and I've got some questions about what happened there. So hi, Gabe. Welcome to the show.
Hello. I can tell you I am at liberty to answer all of your questions, except for the two, but yeah.
Okay. So I'll try to make sure I don't ask those two, even though I'm not sure what those two are. But that's fine. So Black Hat. I've been more times than I can count. I did not go this year. We sent you instead, which I actually am thankful for. Let's play a little game to start with, because when it comes to these conferences in general and security conferences in particular, there's always a couple themes, right? So let's do a theme rundown. Let's play a little buzzword bingo here. How much of what you saw was focused on IoT?
Yeah, you hit the nail right in the head. As themes go, whether intentional or otherwise, IoT was certainly one of the mainstays at the show this year. At least from a vendor perspective anyway, a lot of what folks were talking about with regards to new security offerings focused a lot on IoT. I can't say I was surprised. I mean, IoT is a thing. It's a real thing. I know there were those that kind of got a bit frustrated by, just the terminology being thrown around here, there, and everywhere. But the reality of it is, from both a consumer perspective, it's a very real thing. It has been for a long time and continue to grow. From an enterprise perspective, it equally continues to grow. Whether you are in the manufacturing space or the retail space, IoTs are an integral part of how you do business these days.
Yeah, and like you say, it's not surprising, especially with all of the IoTs becoming botnets over the last year or so, right? I could imagine there were a lot of people who wanted to make a lot of the threat surface really clear, right? So
yeah.
It's why I picked it as the first one. Now, this has been a big one for years, right? What, if anything, was interesting on the cloud front?
So there's a front that's been kind of changing and moving a bit from both the security side of the world as well as just the technology and the adoption side of the world. Again, one of those areas that got a little buzzwordy, but the reality is not a passing fad. Organizations are continuing to move to the cloud, enterprises and as consumers alike. That being said, on the cloud front, there were a couple of noticeable or notable things, I should say. So our friends over at CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, they announced the new body of work that they'll be releasing in November, version 4 of their controls, which promises some significant updates to how they are approaching the best practices for securing the cloud. I mean, I'm personally pleased to see that. We've been making some investments here as an organization ourselves into the cloud. And the truth is, we, and I say we as in the Royal Collective Security, I certainly do need to keep paying attention to how cloud's being used and specifically abused, and paying attention to how we protect the information therein. I think privacy is going to continue to be a massive factor in cloud security, right? So it's not just about securing the assets of an organization enterprise any longer, and not that it has been for quite some time, but as so much of that information moves to the cloud, you introduce a number of things such as not just where the data is and is it secure, but how is it being collected? Who's that third party that now also has it? Because when I turn my data over to you, I have an expectation that you will protect it, and then that you have now turned it over to some other entity so that you can process it, gather it, collect it, secure it. So cloud was, I would say that was a welcome addition, not addition, but certainly it was good to see it well represented at the show.
Got it. Yeah, and it's interesting you say about turning it over to a third party. when I was at the Identity and Privacy Conference over in Germany a couple months ago, one of the interesting side conversations was how if you have someone's data and you turn it over to a third party like a cloud provider,
Yeah.
the irony might be that the cloud provider might in fact have a clearer right to that data than your organization, because your organization may not be as, like in the case of Amazon, they were saying, right? Amazon has a much more clear right to a lot of the information that smaller organizations handle than the smaller organizations themselves.
Right.
Which creates a really interesting legal space, but that's not for us here. Last one on the themes: machine learning, analytics. What was the feel on the floor there? I mean, I'm really bullish on this stuff, but what did Black Hat think?
I got to tell you, this is the one that is still a bit buzzword bingo-ish, right? I mean, it's not that machine learning isn't a thing. It's not that big data analytics isn't a thing. It's not that we can't leverage it to secure our environments. I don't know that we're still seeing enough representation from what we would consider advancements in machine learning that we can really take value and stock in. The UBAs of the world, and every other type of technology, not to pick on those two in particular, but every other type of technology that says it is built upon and or that is the genesis of all of its awesomeness, still has a long way to go. I don't know that I saw anything in particular that impressed me with regards to machine learning and advanced machine learning and things of that nature. That's not to say that there were none there. There certainly may have been. It's a big show. It was one of the largest in its 20 years, but I think we still have some way to go overall within that space. The good news is it's still, again, well represented, and folks are continuing to make progress there. I do believe it is going to help us fill a number of gaps that we continue to have, but there's a lot of baseline gaps that machine learning will never, ever, ever allow us to fix. There are also...
Yeah, I was gonna say that's where we are at, right? Like, machine learning is something like butter, and butter tastes good on most things, but not everything. And
Right.
the security industry as a whole hasn't learned how to spread its butter well. And I don't think that's machine learning's fault, right? I think that's us, right?
There you go. You know what? That's a very good point, and I shouldn't pick on the machine learning so much as I should pick on our adoption and application of it.
Yeah. So I know that's not you didn't go out there for any of that stuff, obviously, right? You went out there for the enterprise front, and of course, this is the Insider Threat podcast. So, talk to me about what you saw that was specific to enterprise threats. And I know you were really laser focused trying to find AD threats. It's all fun to go hack a website, but what did we see that's about on the insider threat side that might be interesting for our audience?
The assumption of compromise was everywhere, and I mean everywhere. It's something that I can recall over 10 years ago getting into a rather heated conversation with the CISO about when I made the statement that one should assume that compromise is among us, because when we start looking at our environments from that way, it focuses us on not just how we keep attackers out, but how we keep our data safe and keep attackers from getting back in. And you're right. So I went there with a pretty clear focus in mind with regards to a few talks in particular. There were three that just weeks before I got there I was excited for. There was one titled "The Active Directory Botnet." There was a second one titled "An Ace Up the Sleeve, Designing Active Directory ACL Backdoors." And there was a third, "Evading Microsoft ATA for Active Directory Domination." That's three talks, three different researchers, actually a total of, if you combine all of the research done by everyone involved in those, something like 12 different individuals that were all focused on Active Directory. So I'll take the first two and then work my way backwards. So the thing about the first two, the Active Directory Botnet and the ACL backdoors, they were both about persistence, right? So when we think about botnets, we often think about simply leveraging someone else's resources for some other purpose, right? So you go out and you get a bunch of bots so that you can then resell their resources to perform DDoSes, or you get a bunch of bots so that you can do whatever. There's all kinds of nefarious things that bad guys use bots for. In this particular case, the botnet was being used both as a command and control for the bad guy, but it was command and control for persistence, insider persistence, so that they could move across internal boundaries. They could move across, and not just Active Directory boundaries, but microsegmentation has been a relatively big deal, if you would. I'd say over the last 5, 6+ years. And it's a sound strategy, maybe a little longer than that, and it has its place. And the persistence that was gained as an insider, even across these segmentations, your internal firewalls and all the other microsegmentation pieces, completely laid to waste. And then the same was true of the other one, the Active Directory ACL backdoors. Now, here's the thing about both of these attacks that I liked from, as someone who has always been interested in security and who is practiced security for quite some time. And I can tell you how many black hats I'm in DEF CONs I'm at this point, but the simplicity of them is really what just made me kind of perk up, because everyone's always looking for the next 0 day and the next big thing. But when you look at the plain simplicity of what really amounted to abuse of legitimate functionality within Active Directory for the purpose of maintaining a persistent control inside an enterprise, was just, I hate to say it, but it was beautiful.
Well, it's interesting. The microsegmentation thing has also been a topic in Active Directory itself, right? I mean, that's Microsoft's Red Forest. That's the whole point of the design.
I
always call it Red Forest. I forget. That's not the name. The Red Forest is part of that, but everybody calls it Red Forest. I'm not going to look it up.
I think even they use that terminology quite heavily, right?
Yes. Yeah, they use it too. That's why I don't feel bad.
Laid to waste.
Yeah, I was going to say. So, so the headlines were all about the AD botnet thing. I saw at least a dozen stories coming out during the conference about AD botnet, probably because the juxtaposition, just like you say, right? Botnets are certainly not typically thought of next to AD, but certainly not thought of in that kind of role. And you sort of hinted at this in your last answer, but I want to ask you really specifically. You sat through the session, you read the stuff, you sent it to me. I haven't read it yet, but it sounds to me like they're using AD the way it's meant to be used. Like, I don't hear an attack on AD. What I hear is using AD the way it works to attack an organization that isn't making sure that AD isn't being used in a bad way.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So at a very high level,
I don't have to read that stuff. Excellent.
There you go. No. In fact, I'm going to make it even easier. You don't have to read any of it. At a very high level, they were abusing AD attribute. So there's dozens of attributes that are built into AD, and they were using the attributes to exchange information amongst machines that they controlled. Now, here's the thing. Again, it assumed compromise, because in order to gain this foothold, at least one of these machines had to have been compromised in some fashion and so forth. But I think it's safe to say that we all do operate on that premise these days, because the level of compromise necessary is just a few clicks away. It's one phishing email away. It's one rogue click away. It is one anything away. You could leverage other 0 days for deployment of this attack and so forth. The thing that's important is again, it's persistence, but said a different way, it is Active Directory attribute abuse. So it is abusing the native functionality of AD attributes for the purpose of hiding right amongst all of the goods.
It's the assumption of compromise. I think it used to threaten people when you said that, because they felt like it was a judgment on them. And now, and just like you say, right, the phishing emails are. The assumption of compromise is now not a judgment of the security people; it's a judgment of the user, and security people are always willing to blame the user, right? So it's gotten easier to have that conversation. So there was 3 different AD attacks, probably mention of AD in other sessions we won't get into because of lack of time. But if you had to pick out some common threads with these AD attacks, you did a little bit of it in terms of the elegance. I get that, but from a technical perspective, what would you think unites? What makes them similar, if anything? Maybe
So what really unites them, makes them similar, is I'm going to touch on the third one, the evading Microsoft ATA. The thing that makes them so the thing they have in common is that the only way that you guard against them is by simply paying closer attention. At least that's what all of the researchers said. Legitimately, all of the researchers, the answer was protection mechanisms boil down to paying better attention to your logs, or setting up your logging in different ways so that it pays attention to these 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 things. There was no enable this and it will block that, or buy this and it will stop that kind of thing. A lot of it was paying closer attention to your logs in some specific way. That was both disappointing and kind of heartening at the same time. Disappointing largely because if I'm walking out of there as someone who still had a large enterprise under his protection, I'd be a bit worried, like, oh my God, so now I have this massive threat in front of me, and you're basically just sending me back home, telling me to look at things I'm already looking at, like go look some more because you're missing it. And then the part of it that really kind of emboldens at least Gabriel Gumbs, VP of Product Strategy, is that we as an organization have been working diligently over the last few months on very similar detection and protection techniques. And what I can say is, we certainly do have some mechanisms for being able to block those things. And I don't say that in kind of a very thinly veiled, promotional way. I say that as in the thing
it wasn't thinly veiled at all. It was right out in the open.
Right out there, right? Yeah, right. The thing though about all three of them was it highlighted that, again, for all of the machine learning in the world and all those other things, the way we're going to protect ourselves against these types of advanced enterprise threats is going to come back to how we view our environments. How we protect them has everything to do with how we view them, and not simply what new, again, just to pick on them further, what new machine learning thing we throw in front of it.
Well, I mean, and that goes right to the heart of what we said about the attacks in general. Since they're all attribute abuse, or just using the way the system works, you can't. The only way to stop the way the system works is to turn it off, right? So, Since you can't turn it off, you have to be able to monitor to make sure it's not being abused as well as you, right? So we're over time already, so I'm going to wrap this up here. So first of all, thanks, Gabe, for joining us yet again. If you want to hear more about Gabe's experiences at Black Hat and our perspective there, actually you can go to securityguydetv.com, and there's a live stream that's been archived there where they had a conversation with Gabriel at the show, where they did ask him some pretty insightful questions, so you can go check that out. And Gabe's going to be writing a long and exhaustive postmortem of his Black Hat experiences up on the blog. That's not up there yet, but it will be soon. So I invite you to go to stealthbits.com and check out the blog to find out more. You've been listening to the Insider Threat podcast today from StealthBits. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again, Gabe.
Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone. Till next time.
Thank you, everyone out there in userland. Be careful.
Be careful.